Welcome to another episode of Indaba, the African Debate. My name is Mdudu Zibrian, and thank you ever so much for joining me today. Please don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and all those other great things that you guys do. Let's dive in. Today, we have a special guest with us, all the way from Uganda. Maybe he will do the introductions himself. Geoffrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. My name is Mutabazi Geofrey. I'm the founder of ChargeCore Technologies. What ChargeCore Technologies does is we're making owning and operating battery-powered devices more convenient and affordable. And battery-powered devices could include mobile phones, electric vehicles, energy backup systems. So we're based in Uganda, and we're starting with the I would say largest and most obvious market, which is the mobile phone market. For example, in Uganda, there's 3 times more mobile phones than light bulbs. And there is, in a context of energy access versus mobile penetration, energy access is moving much slower compared to mobile phone penetration. So more people need a way to charge, but also phones run out of battery multiple times during the day. Your phone can barely get through an entire day on a single charge. If you actually do stuff with your phone, you can barely get through a whole day with a full battery. So you need to charge up during the day, and we are creating that avenue. So we are based in Uganda, in Kampala. We've been operating for a little over 2 years. And yeah, that's basically it about me and my startup.
Brilliant. Now, 2 questions from that is, the first question is, what inspired you to get into, to start ChargeCore? And so far, since you started it, how's been the uptake? Is it something that people are very keen on and are very happy to be using your services?
Yes, so that's a great question. I mean, what got me started is I used to face the problem myself. Charging is a huge problem for most people who actually do stuff with their phones. If you're an active mobile phone user, you've definitely run out of battery quite a few times during the week, maybe at a restaurant, out for a meeting, at the bar, you're catching a drink. At the hospital, you're waiting for a doctor. So I used to run out of battery on so many occasions, and I decided to solve the problem for myself and then for other people. And then the uptake, I think it's so far I've had way more demand than we can basically supply. Not in terms of people who want to charge per location because of the reduced numbers due to COVID-19. So we thrive more on public locations, and public locations that are at a lower capacity. But in terms of location-specific demand, locations that need charging stations, it's been a lot of demand so far.
Brilliant, man. That's good to hear that is picking up, and even through COVID, although the numbers are very low, you still are getting very good demand. That's really brilliant to hear.
Yes, yes. But in terms of demand, also there's the fact that the demand in terms of numbers might not be high, numbers per location, but the demand in terms of mobile phone activity. So people are using their phones more during and after the pandemic compared to before. So there's an uptick in demand in terms of number of people who want to charge per location. But I mean, as the places start to open up, the number of people will increase exponentially to even higher numbers as we get more occupancy or capacity.
Well, certainly, yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot now with my next few questions, and I hope you don't mind.
No worries.
One thing that does around a lot nowadays when we speak of energy is sustainable energy. It's clean energy. As much as you are a small startup in relative terms, over the next few years, do you see yourself getting into that space of sustainable energy at all?
Yes, we are actually getting into the sustainable energy space, but we're starting, of course, with sizing up the opportunity and also building up standardization. So the major thing is, if you look at electric vehicles as a case study, as one of the things we're actually working on, electric vehicles have a two-sided problem. There's number of electric vehicles available and the cost. That's an OEM type problem or a manufacturer type problem. And then there's another side, which is convenience of owning an electric vehicle. So where are you going to charge the electric vehicle? So for a manufacturer to start selling electric vehicles, say in Kenya, for example, there have to be charging stations, right? And there has to be demand for electric vehicles. But that demand comes from people. But when people are evaluating a decision of, should I buy an electric vehicle or not, guess what they're looking at? They're looking at the price of the electric vehicle. And then secondly, and most importantly, the biggest deal breaker is their charging infrastructure for when I run out of battery. So the automaker wants to see, charging infrastructure on the ground and demonstrated demand. But then the customer wants to establish demand or will want to buy an electric vehicle when there's already charging infrastructure. So none of the two wants to get in first. And what we're basically doing is we're saying we want to get there first, but we also want to first build what I would call a more sustainable, I would say, energy infrastructure base. So how do you ensure that you're not having the US or European problem of there's so many charging stations, but these charging stations are for only a particular brand?
Yes, that's
like Tesla has so many charging stations, and then there are like more than 5 charging standards, which is also the same problem you see with mobile phones. Apple has its own charging plug. Android has its own charging plugs. Maybe Samsung has, Type-C, and Techno and a few other brands also have maybe micro USB. And this standardization is actually happening in phone charging or in mobile phones, where most of the phone manufacturers are actually gravitating towards Type-C as a common charging standard or as a common connectivity standard. And what we are looking at is how can we drive the same for electric vehicles? How do we build something that enables people to own an electric vehicle and charge it anywhere? And that's the base that we're starting with.
And I think you are quite ahead of the curve, really, because obviously in context, Europe over the next 10, 15 years, car manufacturers are almost going to stop producing diesel and petrol engines, and most of them will be electric. And I see that Africa as well over the next 10, 15, 20 years will catch up to that, in the sense that obviously car manufacturers penetrate these spaces. So I think you are well in front of the curve, so to speak, when it comes to that. This again is to put you on the spot. Now, Africa has challenges when it comes to energy. We know that and we see that constantly. And personally, just looking at it, how do you think Africa can solve its energy crisis, considering that you have a continent that has 300 odd days of sunshine, a continent that can have wind turbines in most places, a continent that can have hydroelectric power at will with the amount of lakes and rivers we have?
So energy access is quite a trick, because energy access, like you mentioned, all these things, the only universal thing is energy. Sunshine. But wind is only in particular spots. Hydro is only in particular spots. And I think the biggest challenge that energy access, driving energy access, that's basically holding back, 100% energy access in Africa, is centralization. So when you centralize energy generation, distribution becomes quite a problem. It becomes really expensive to distribute that electricity to, all the locations. So to distribute it evenly across the continent, one, you need, I'll give you an example. Uganda has a lot more electricity than it can, consume.
Yeah.
But then it has neighboring countries that don't have as much electricity as it has. So it has to export. But then even though it exports at the moment, not all the neighbors can take up, all the electricity. It needs to skip. So skip to probably some parts of DRC, skip to probably maybe Zambia, skip to probably Zimbabwe, which have energy capacity problems. So the biggest, thing is, how do you drive interconnectivity and decentralization at the same time? How do you have more like smaller applications like solar in low income and remote locations instead of extending a grid there, which would be quite expensive? Build up that capacity and get these people to consume more electricity from a smaller investment. But then over time, how do you get these people a more centralized source of energy? So when they grow their capacity or their consumption, how do you grow? How do you give them maybe more centralized power, which at times is more economically, viable? If these people say in this particular village are now starting to set up small manufacturing plants or processing plants for agriculture, how do you grow that sustainably without having to, invest in a lot of redundant infrastructure? So, but then when you look at energy access also, there's the problem of financing. How do you finance all these transactions, all this infrastructure, without having it too government focused or without having it too private focused? Because if you have too much private focused energy infrastructure, then you're going to have a problem of, electricity is too expensive for the common man, right? But then if you have too much government focused infrastructure, they're going to be doing quite unsustainable and quite less innovative things. So you then have a challenge of either a high debt to GDP ratio. That means the country will not be developing because most of the money is being channeled towards unprofitable power infrastructure deployments. And then that's taking away from healthcare, that's taking away from, transportation and other sectors. So it's a really complex problem and there's no one size fits all. Solution. But what I would say is, for the start, the best thing is, how can we move away from too much centralization and decentralize a bit, use a little bit more solar, and reduce on the centralization because it's really expensive to evacuate or to hit 100% energy access, given the state of, sparse population in Africa. Most of the communities are really spread out. That if you decided to take a grid line to each of those communities, it would be quite expensive to reach all of them. But then if you gave them solar and enabled them to grow their consumption, at the end of the day, you'd have a much more sustainable operation, because then you're scaling to them with a grid line at a point where they are now demanding a lot more power, maybe for processing or manufacturing. So it's a mix and match, I would say. It's not like a one size fits all type solution.
Yeah, well, brilliant. Thank you for that. Last question before we dash off. What are your thoughts on Akon's project that seems to be taking place in Uganda sometime soon if he gets it off the ground?
I would say it's very futuristic, which is good, but I think there's a lot more problems to solve before even going into such a thing. Akon has done a project called Lighting Africa, which I think is more impactful if scaled up compared to doing the futuristic city. I think just providing lighting enables thousands of businesses in small communities operate for longer hours. Just that. It increases security. It does so much that a futuristic city won't do in the short term.
Yeah.
So I would say the focus should be more on how do you scale up this lighting project across Africa realistically. And then because I'll give you an example. The budget, I mean, and the discussions that need to be had to provide street lighting, at least in most of the major towns in Uganda, would be, tiny compared to the budget that he's looking at for the entire futuristic city. And I would say development doesn't happen in jumps. Yeah. It happens in progression. You don't just build a city and then people just, flock there. It doesn't work like that. You pretty much build something progressively. So I would say Akon has a good idea, but I think prioritization, there's a lot more important problems to solve. I think focusing a lot more on how do you retrofit existing cities with the right infrastructure to enable them grow into, that futuristic city, compared to saying you want to build a whole futuristic city in like a bare land and I would say get people to move there, which is quite a bit of a stretch. So it's a good idea, but I think priorities. And honestly, I would say personally, I have a few ideas for, communities, and it's one of the things I'm working on probably the next 20 years or, 30 years. But my idea is more like, how do you build small communities that are from scratch, but can grow organically? How do you build a small community? Okay, let's say, I'll give you an example. How do you build 3 small communities? Let's say a community for techpreneurs, a community for industrialists and makers, and maybe a food community or an agriculture-driven community. Build a community around a particular economic activity, give them capacity to build up that economic activity and get these 3 communities to trade with each other. The industrialization guys could add value to the agriculture. The software guys could build solutions for both the industrial and agricultural guys. And these 3 communities could pretty much feed off of each other. But they also have to be empowered to grow organically. So if someone wants to set up a small, agro skills training facility in the tech community, then it doesn't, you don't say that, oh, this is an agricultural, this is a tech community, you don't have to set that up here. Yeah. You basically enable them to grow. And if you look at most of the important, I would say, cities in the world, they are built around one thing. And then all these other things just came in. If you look at China or Shenzhen, for example, it's a tech city. It's built around innovation. If you look at Silicon Valley, same thing. If you look at New York, finance is what actually built New York. If you look at Boston, it's auto manufacturing, and then these other things also came up. But I would say it's more progressive and it's more people driven, and less over and less hierarchy and planned development style of doing things. It's I would say build the systems that enable people to grow an Akon city, rather than building the city and expecting people to just move into a finished thing. I think there's a balancing act there. It's a good idea, but I mean the execution could be quite difficult on a societal level, on a financing scale, on an adoption level, on a growth level. It has a lot of hurdles that need to be, skipped.
Quite certainly. I mean, I do really agree with you there that even on a basic society level, one thing that us as a group of people in Africa is that we rarely just want to leave where we are to go and live elsewhere. We are very dependent within our own support systems. Grandmother is here, my dad is here, my aunties are here, we're all in the community together. If we do move, it's usually very forced because of work and other things. So I really do agree with you there. Our challenge to you then will be that in the next few years, we'll see you in the automotive sector with an electric car, isn't it?
Well, I would rather be the guy empowering the industry than the guy running the industry. So I think there's a lot of, if the 21st century has taught us anything, it's that platforms thrive more than, dictatorships or monopolies. Build a platform and let people engage with it. Look at Amazon, look at, Facebook, look at Uber. I mean, these are platforms that are empowering people. So I would look at, what I'm doing as how do I enable people to adopt and use electric vehicles or electric mobility much more conveniently and affordably, because those are the two major things. Are electric vehicles affordable? Are they convenient enough to own? The same way you'd own an internal combustion engine car. Yeah. So you'd rather be the person enabling people, because then you create shared value. And that's what we're driving towards. Not making cars, because there's so many smart people who have made cars and who are making cars. But those people need a lot of support on an adoption type, on an adoption side of things.
Quite certainly. Geofrey, thank you ever so much for joining us here at Indaba, the African Debate.
Thank you so much for hosting me. This was great.
This has been Indaba, the African Debate. Thank you ever so much. Goodbye.